Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's podcast. I'm delighted to be joined by Caro, who I met last week at a Women in Business networking event. And I was so moved by what you do and your story and how you help people to have some very difficult conversations. But I'm going to let you introduce yourself and tell us all about you and what you do.
Thank you, Nikki. What a pleasure to be here. So I was just saying before we started, I find it difficult sometimes to articulate exactly what I do, but I will give it a go and try and be as succinct as possible. I think what I do is I help busy people who are often what I call in the sandwich generation. So they would be people that are squished between either having a younger family and an aging parent. And they often are very time poor. They're stretched very thinly on every front with time, energy, and their own mental bandwidth. And what I try to do is I help them to find and fix the blind spots that they might have in both their personal and sometimes their business lives, so that they can feel both prepared and more confident that their life and their death admin affairs, really, they're all in order to be able to hand them over just in case life throws them that curveball sooner rather than later, but for when, not if, they die, because that is the elephant in the room that sometimes we don't like to see, but we will all die at some point. So I think we'll get that D word in very early on, just to help people know that there is a trigger warning that we will be talking about death and dying today, and it can't be avoided in the work that I do.
Yes, thank you for that. And I found it very interesting because I am one of those sandwich generation people with aging parents, having those difficult conversations about funerals and death and going into homes and all of those, and power of attorneys.
Yes.
None of these conversations that we want to have. But as you say, we are all going to die. And I think it's probably a conversation that some of us avoid.
Mm-hmm.
We do need to have. So tell us a little bit about how you ended up in this role and what you do.
Yeah, so I've kind of fallen in here by accident. It wasn't something that I left school and thought, gosh, I want to set up Your Final Matters and start helping people. I have quite a mixed background. I started off in healthcare in the NHS, and then I moved into financial services. I have had a stint in software development and the digital arena. And I think more latterly, I have been helping my own 92-year-old mum with her affairs and managing things for her. And I've been bringing in all the different strands of my background to be able to navigate conversations with her. I'm also an independent funeral celebrant, which is just another one of those random things that I just went off and wanted to understand more about. So I decided to qualify. But I brought all of those things together, and each time we did something, she would say to me, gosh, what happens if people don't have a Caro? And I said, oh, Mum, I think everybody's got someone that they could ask. And she suggested that not everybody did have somebody that was able to step in and help with those things. And it got me thinking that, gosh, I did probably have a lot of mixed knowledge, that I was joining up all these dots. And many of these things that I was doing for her can't be looked at in isolation. So you can't just look at your will as a single document and not look at the wider aspect of how it might affect other areas of your later life. And it's the same with powers of attorney, advanced care planning, funeral planning, your pensions, your investments, all of those things, and also probate. And I realised that I'd actually got this invisible system in my head. I've got this framework, and that's part of how I've operated through life. And I started to look at it more closely, and I realized that I did have this system, and I thought, gosh, maybe I could help other people. And I thought how useful it would be just to look at other people like me that did have an older parent and a younger family, and to just see what I could do, if anything. So I started to talk about it with some of my other sort of peers, and they sort of very kindly said, gosh, this is a great idea, could we come on a workshop? And I suddenly thought, oh my God, I'm going to have to make it a little bit formal. And sure enough, I ran my first workshop last July, and it was filled with a really supportive group of people, some of them friends and no family, but just friends that had really backed me on the idea, and some people that I didn't know came as well. And that's really how it started. And I've just been running these half-day workshops, and I'm now branching into deeper dives of 2-hour workshops, really just to help people get their ducks in a row. I often say it's just about getting your ducks in a row, because most people, find it difficult to use sort of terminology relating to for when I'm going to die, or, if the worst possible thing happens. And I'm not a morbid person. I live life in colour, and I'm very considered in how I spend my energy. And a lot of that is very positive and upbeat. I like to find joy and sparkle. So I'm a very practical person, and I really want to help people. And because I am so organised and I have this very organised and structured brain, I'm able to see it quite easily and explain it to people in sound bites that they seem to also be able to digest and then take action to get things going. That's a bit of a long-winded question as to what do I do, isn't it?
No, it's great. I think it's very clear, and that you've explained exactly what you do. And for those of you listening, you're talking about you live your life in colour. When I met Caro, she was wearing a very pink outfit, and you said to me, "Don't normally wear pink. I normally wear yellow." So yeah, just to confirm.
Yeah, no, for my sunflowers. Yeah,
Yellow for your sunflowers. Yeah,
yeah.
which was a great idea. Tell us a bit about the sunflowers, actually.
Yeah, so I was trying to think, everything that I do is really just about starting conversations, difficult conversations, very similar to you, building that trust, trying to get that built quickly or slowly. It's not often a life and death situation, for you, having been a crisis and hostage negotiator. Time is of the essence, probably a lot more for you. I'm not in quite such a time sensitive periods, but I start difficult conversations, or I encourage people to do that. And I think I ask the hard questions that people don't really want to even ask themselves, so that I can then see what blind spots they've got. And then I want to help them fix it together. But I've been finding it harder to reach people to get those initial conversations started around, hello, this is what I do. Would you be interested in finding out more? So I started something called the Sunflower Stories Project this year, where I started to grow sunflowers. I moved to a lovely house last year, and I've got a very clapped out old greenhouse, but I was super enthusiastic because it had glass in it and it was quite warm. And I started growing some sunflower seeds, and before I knew it, I'd got an abundance of them. And it suddenly occurred to me that sunflowers are actually very resilient, and they're gorgeous when they've bloomed. And when they have finished growing, they have this beautiful head of seeds, which is effectively their legacy. And it occurred to me that with all of my surplus sunflowers, I could actually start giving them out to people locally, which is what I started to do. And this summer, I've given out 80 sunflowers to local people, and I advertised on my Facebook group, and I asked anybody that was a carer or a sandwich generation person to let me know, and I could either drop off a sunflower or they could pick them up. And my one ask was, while they were growing them this summer, was to please have one tricky conversation that you might not have with a loved one over the summer, and to also put one piece of paperwork into a folder which wouldn't otherwise have got put away if you didn't have your sunflower. So I said, you've got the whole summer. It will grow, as quickly or as slowly as you water it. And I would just like you to do two things while you're growing your sunflower. And I've had the most wonderful response back from people. They've sent me updates of their sunflowers growing, and people have got them. They're higher than like a single story home, some of them, that have done super well. And people have all been really engaged with it. But it's enabled me to start that conversation and to start feeling that I'm making a bit of a difference using the sunflowers, because they're just a tool really to just start people chatting on whatever, because nobody wants to sort of rock up and just say, should we talk about your funeral, because that just doesn't ever go down terribly well. But I have so much knowledge around so many different areas, and I kind of feel like I'm overflowing with excitement on it. And I don't exactly put the fun into funerals, but I do try to sort of make it digestible so that people recognize that these are really, really important topics. And one of the things that I think you spoke about when I heard you talking about last week's were things about, beliefs can drive your reactions. And one of the things is that I think common belief systems that I meet are talking about death is going to bring it closer, or it might be greedy to talk about inheritance, or I don't want to be a burden, or my kids are going to sort it out themselves. So people have these ideas in their head, or these beliefs, but actually they're not really a realistic idea and an output, etc. So I try to explore that and ask people to sort of tell me what you've always believed about talking about money and death in your family, because it often goes back to these roots. What would a good death or a good handover look like to you? So that I can start to unpack some of that and perhaps challenge those in a supportive and compassionate way so that they feel less fearful. Because I think a lot of the either irritation or anger that comes out when we try to start these conversations is really in the depths of fear and loss. Anger is just a mask for it. And people push back with anger because they're feeling that there's a loss. And it's about sort of trying to recognize what it might be that they're worried about, or what that loss might represent for them. So it could be a loss of independence. So that's care decisions, powers of attorney, and things are often caught up around independence. It might be loss of control. Who decides what's going to happen if I can't? People are very frightened about losing control and signing over things in powers of attorney, etc. It might even be about loss of identity, through retirement or illness, or no longer being seen as the capable one. I remember you mentioning last week about, when you retired, you felt like, who's Nikki? What do I do now? And, when you leave a lifelong career, there can sometimes be a bit of an identity loss of what's next. And I think we all need hope, or some level of hope to look forward to have that forward trajectory. And when you don't wake up feeling hopeful or having those things to look forward to that you might have before, it feels that an ending is getting closer, when in fact it could just be the start of a new beginning. And it's trying to help people transition over to see that. So preparing for your later life and for your death or your incapacity, even when you're in your 30s or 40s, is obviously very forward thinking. I'm hoping that most people will have decades left of their life, but it can also be quite an important moment, because it helps us realize that life is finite, life is very fragile, and we mustn't waste a moment of it. And it's very precious. And, maybe it's that time to take stock and think, gosh, what the hell am I doing with my life? I've been in this 9 to 5 or this shift work pattern or whatever, and I'm just sleepwalking through life, and I'm not really getting joy and sparkle in my day every day, and I'm planning for when I'm not going to be here anymore, or whatever it is. God, I need to give up that job. I need to follow my heart. I need to do travel. I need to do whatever it is. But sometimes we don't get that clarity until we actually look at where we are in our life and we see the end line, and we're not rushing towards it, but we recognize that the fullness of life is a gift. And, getting old is also a gift and a privilege that's not afforded to every one of us. And, for any person, male suicide is one of the highest rates that it's ever been. And it's absolutely tragic. But life is often snuffed out because people feel hopeless. And I just find that so sad. And I'm not quite sure how to reach those people. So that's not my bag. I'm here to help them talk about transitioning and handing the baton on smoothly. But those are the sort of things that I've had in my experience.
Yeah, and there's a lot there. And if I just talk about my own life, it's funny because I was talking to my other half about, there are things that they don't know where to find them if I died tomorrow. And that would then become a nightmare. So not only are you dealing with the grief of losing somebody unexpectedly, but then suddenly you're looking for bank accounts. I've got a property with a friend of mine. I've got another property that I rent out, and they know nothing about them. And that started me thinking, right, I need to set up a folder, or I need to do something.
Yeah.
I need to spend
Yeah.
some time doing that. Would I have done it more if I'd been given a sunflower by you, Carol? I might have done, actually, because you have spurred me into thinking about that.
Yeah.
And then the other thing that you talk about, some people are more open to talking about death, and some people are more closed. I've got a great example of my mother-in-law is starting to plan her funeral. She's 87. She is talking about going and paying for it so that the responsibility is not left on her children, and she gets what she wants. When I spoke to my mum about it, who's quite happy to do the power of attorney and bits and pieces, and I'll share a story in a bit about power of attorney, and why I believe it's so important, is I mentioned this to her, and she was like, why would I want to plan my funeral? I said, well, mum, because then you can have something that you want. And she just burst out laughing. And I said, why are you laughing? And she said, because I won't be there. So I don't really care. And I'm like, and that's lovely and that's fine. However, me and my sister will want to send you to wherever you're going, whatever you believe in, according to your wishes, not make it up on the hoof whilst dealing with the grief that we're going through in losing you. So it's
And
very interesting, that, I think.
yeah, it's around having some guidance and some context, because I think when I brought up the subject with my own mum, and I had my own preconceived ideas about what she may want for her funeral. And actually, when she explained to me, and we did start talking about it, and she explained what she would have wanted, it was actually quite different to what I would have done. And the other really funny thing is that we would have done the funeral as per, myself and my siblings' thoughts, etc., if we hadn't asked that conversation. And we would have probably finished the funeral and gone around patting ourselves on the back, saying, "Oh, didn't we do a great job? Mum would have really liked that." And in actual fact, when we actually had the conversation and she explained that she would like people to be there with some colour, and these were the songs and these were the psalms and the prayers, I wouldn't have known any of that if we hadn't had that conversation. And this is the picture she would like to have chosen to go on her order. Honestly, we would have had a completely different service. And you know what? We would have been none the wiser for the end of it. But I think one of the biggest things that I come across in the work that I do is that I recognise that we all want choices. And I think you must recognise that a lot, that people don't ever want to feel that their back's against the wall and they don't have options. We all like to feel that we have some control and agency over where we're going. And even if it's just option A or option B, at least we can focus and think, right, well, that looks a better option. But we want to have these options. And I think the other really key thing throughout life is that we all want to feel seen, heard, and understood. And those three things are probably three things that I feel so passionate about, because for many decades I hadn't not really truly felt seen, heard, or understood. And as a result, I felt quite repressed and just really, well, not seen, heard, or understood. And I felt that I didn't have a voice that was of any value. And I think that the core thing for people to really feel alive and authentic and living in their true self is that they have those needs met. But I say to people, in order for you to have choices and in order for you to feel seen, heard, and understood, we have to get those things written down legally for you in a way that your wishes can be carried out. And you cannot just rely on the state or your family knowing what to do, or just presuming that it will be taken care of in the way that you have it in your head, because that's just not the reality. And it's quite a stark eye-opener to say it so bluntly to people. And I talk a little bit about the cost of doing nothing, because 70% of us don't have a power of attorney, which would be that person that would advocate for us if we were to be unwell and not be able to speak for ourselves. And I totally understand that it's often the cost that gets in the way and the enormous amount of paperwork and pages that you do need to fill in. But I try and talk to people about the cost of doing nothing, which for £92 per form to submit the form online through the government website, the cost of doing nothing if something were to happen and you were needing to get deputyship, which is the sort of stand-in power of attorney option, is actually sort of in the late hundreds to thousands. And the cost of time and stress for your loved ones at an already impossible moment of their lives, if somebody doesn't have capacity, can just be so overwhelming. And I think, gosh, for the cost of £92, let's just at least explore it and talk about it. You can either go straight to the government website and DIY it. You can get a solicitor to do it for £300 to £500 per power of attorney and the admission cost. Or there are some halfway houses and things. I've got links on my website to, have a hybrid where it's like the passport checker, where they look through your forms to make sure it doesn't get rejected. But the thing with the power of attorney that gives us that choice to choose who we want to speak on our behalf is that it just means that we've got that person speaking in a way that we can't do for ourselves, and we have choice in that moment, because the cost of doing nothing is just so much scarier, I think. But people don't, the excuses I hear, it's not going to happen to me, that happens to other people, it's going to be ages till I need that sort of thing, or that's just for old people. But life is so unpredictable. We leave in the morning and none of us has that guarantee of putting the key in the door in the evening. Mm-hmm. And I say that not to scare people, but just to remind them that life is fragile. And, there are many sliding door moments that we go through every single day. And we should make sure that preparedness is something that we do address and we don't just leave and put off. And it's important. I like to see myself as a cost-effective wing woman. I don't send people to experts unnecessarily. You know, a lot of people can do many things themselves, and you know, but I'm all for experts. You know, if you've got a home and you've got a blended family and you've got a complex situation, I definitely never recommend a DIY will. It's great that you've thought about it, but please go and see an expert. The money is really, really well spent to have things structured in a way that will suit your circumstances. And it's the same with IFAs, you know, independent financial advisors. If you've got complex situations and things that you could be mitigating inheritance tax and that sort of thing, then I will send people to advisors. I'm not anti-experts and getting professional help at all, but there are lots and lots of things that we can do cost effectively, and I can direct people to government websites or free links and those sorts of things. But there's so much that people can do for themselves. They just need a little bit of guidance and to know where to start and to get that sort of impetus and getting going, really.
Yeah, and I think often in life that we do it when we have to, unfortunately, when something has happened, when a loved one has passed away unexpectedly or had a stroke or a brain injury. There are so many different varieties of ways that we can suddenly not be capable of giving instruction, whether that's around money or health. And having those conversations, I think about, you know, this is not about me taking power away from you or giving power to somebody else, because you're still in complete control. This is about, as you said, now having choice around who do I want to stand for me if I can't speak for myself for whatever reason. And very sadly, there are so many reasons that happen like that. And I should imagine most of the listeners to this podcast have sadly experienced something that's happened just like that.
Yeah.
And then there's no choice.
And I think loneliness as well and isolation. I think, you know, loneliness is one of the biggest killers. You can feel lonely in a room full of people these days. I'm very passionate about disconnect to reconnect. And, you know, whether you're running your own business, if you're, you know, a single parent, or if you're recently bereaved, or your partner's incredibly busy at work and you're at home with the kids or whatever. And, you know, COVID, we all felt that sort of mismatch of isolation and that sort of thing. But I think many people, certainly the people that I see, they're often carrying that burden quietly all on their own. They're caring, you know, they're a carer, an unpaid carer quite often. They might have a financial worry or a burden. They might have future fears because they're single. And the other one is they might have a big extended family, but family dynamics are complicated. You know, a lot of families have got many things bubbling under the surface that people don't talk about, or they bury their head in the sand. And it might feel like no one else in the family wants to talk about this, or they just don't get me, or, you know, everything is complicated. And God forbid, you might have to organise a funeral altogether, and you might be seeing siblings that you've not seen for 3, 5, 10 years. And the last time you spoke was in a huge row about something. And now you're having to choose your mum's coffin type. You know, they're a hotbed of a mess and a problem waiting to happen. So it often is the kindest thing that you could possibly do is to start preparing and taking away that, you know, the chaos, the confusion, and then the potential conflict that could ensue by leaving things in a mess and a muddle. And also, I think, to create spaces where these taboo topics can finally be spoken out loud. I never mind it when somebody, you know, comes with their mum and they've got them there because they've said, Mum, there's this crazy lady, she's doing this workshop, and I think I'm going to be left, you know, you've left me as the executor and I've not got a clue where anything is. So let's go and see if she's got any ideas, you know. And they come under the guise of, you know, this crazy lady running this workshop. And, you know, mum totters along and suddenly she thinks it's a great idea because I've stood at the front and said, this is what you need, and this is what you, and this is what the daughter or the son has been trying to elicit all along. But because it comes from that third party, it doesn't feel so, you know, confrontational that, Mum, where do you want this? What are you doing with that? Or whatever. So, you know, I am very happy to be the fall guide for that. But then they come for the workshop for their mum, but they also recognise that they need to do it for themselves as well. And I think combating that emotional isolation by giving people permission to talk about it in my workshops or alongside me if they want to do one-to-one work, it deflects and it kind of takes that focus off of them being that source of irritation or frustration, bringing up this topic again. And did you just want to get your hands on my money? Or yes, why are you rushing me into my grave? Are you trying to get rid of me? That's one of the lines that I hear people say a lot.
Yeah.
But I also hear parents, older parents saying, my son just doesn't want to talk about it. He thinks I'm being morbid, but I really want to tell him what I would like. And so I do hear it from both ends of the spectrum. And it's about trying to get them to meet in the middle and start those difficult conversations and build that trust between them, that it's a topic that must be covered, really.
Yeah.
And yeah, I don't know what your experience is in those sorts of things. I think we have a generational gap as well. Would you agree with that?
I think so. Yeah,
Yeah,
definitely.
different generations certainly communicate differently. How your older parent and your adult children talk about things is quite varied, and it's about finding that middle ground. And you can often be mediating 3-generation communication styles, which is quite bizarre because the younger generation just want everything on a text, and it needs to be very short and snappy and just get to the point. And the older people often don't want to talk about it, and the middle people are so frazzled. They're just yeah. It's quite a mix of things.
Yeah. You've mentioned a couple of things I'd just like to pick up on there, Caro. So you talked about trust, which in the world of hostage and crisis negotiation is super important. But as I say to many people, it doesn't matter what business you're in, we're all in the business of people, and trust is absolutely key. You talked about feeling seen and heard, and being lonely, even if you're in a room full of people. And sadly, I believe that that loneliness is one of the biggest killers in the world.
Yeah.
Feeling lonely can be very hard and challenging. And we talked about emotional conversations when it's family. And actually, if there's a third person involved, it can be easier because the third person is far more logical in their logical space rather than in their emotional brain. And it's fascinating. I always find this interesting that if I make a suggestion to my other half or to the teenager in my life, both of them ignore it. And then if somebody else makes the same suggestion, maybe a friend or a colleague or someone that they respect, they both go, oh yeah, that's what I'm going to do.
Best idea since sliced bread.
Exactly, yeah. And I'm exactly the same. The same. I'll go and see my coach. I'll come back and I'll go, oh, my coach has just said this. I think it's amazing. My other half will look at me and go, I suggested that 4 months ago. And I'll be like, okay, well, I'll choose to brush over that. But yeah, but it's true, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's harder when you're emotionally connected to somebody. They are the hardest conversations to have.
And I think what you talked about last week, which I really sort of latched onto about this trust before influence. I think, you talked about connection before direction. You cannot influence without trust. And it's so important that you've had that opportunity to build that trust. So I often start sessions with, tell me what brought you here today. Tell me what worries you most about this topic. And it's only after they feel heard that I can then start to talk about documents and checklists and logistics and things. You just cannot spreadsheet your way into a hard conversation. It just doesn't happen. People are only going to start planning once they feel that they followed their feelings. So, it's a difficult topic for people to decide to book on a half-day workshop or a 2-hour workshop if they've never heard me speak, because they don't know what my energy might be. And, I might just be the most tedious, boring person ever to ever think that you might want to book half a day with. But that's, I have to get over my fear of speaking by, appearing on more podcasts, by turning up on social media, so that people can understand and hear my energy and see my space that I take up and decide if that resonates with them. Because, as you know, people decide very quickly whether they think you're their person or not. And if they're not, it doesn't matter how amazing your course or your workshop or what you have to tell them could be and could move them forwards. If they don't trust you and they don't have that sense of feeling that you're their person, then they're not going to really give any merit or credit to what you're talking about. And they're definitely not going to be influenced to take action. So I recognize that, I am not everybody's energy, and that's totally fine. I can't help the whole world, even though everybody is going to die. But I want to work with action takers, people that recognize the difference between, having an organized estate and having given it some thought and put some things into context, compared to people that are just prepared to just say, you know what? fuck it. I don't even know sorry, I don't know if I can say that.
You can say that, it's not a
Yes.
problem.
If they just say fuck it, you just leave it to yourselves, and you can get on with it, and they really don't care what happens after they've died, because they aren't going to be here to unravel it. But I think the majority of people really are good, caring humans, and they do want to hand things over with some semblance of organization. And I think one of the things I talk about a lot more is digital legacy, because we all have the hugest online digital footprint these days. And we are sleepwalking into a crisis where the government is digitalizing everything, and we cannot do anything without having a username and a password, and AI seems to know more than we could ever possibly know. But with all of this digitalization, we have this huge digital legacy, and people aren't realizing the value and the importance of, I talk a lot now about having a digital executor, and having a digital will, because we have so many passwords and things, and so many things are locked behind, walls online. And there is 4.5 billion, that's with a B, 4.5 billion pounds sitting in UK bank accounts that are forgotten or lost or haven't been claimed, because it's never been easier for us to set up a bank account these days. You can do it all within 3 or 4 minutes. That's what the banks boast. And you may never have a paper statement sent to you. So how on earth is your executor possibly going to know that you've got something over in Monzo, and that you've moved something over to Santander because they did a special £200 switch, or whatever it was? And I meet an increasing number of women who have a little emergency security fund, like stashed away just in case they might need to leave a marriage or a relationship. And they have that emergency fund that nobody knows about apart from themselves and then me when they tell me, because they know what I do, as if I've suddenly got access to know that it's actually, what the sort code is, etc. But I hear this increasingly, and I don't want £10,000 to be locked away where their children can't get it. I'm really passionate that every single penny that people have earned finds its way, once they're not here, to their loved ones and the beneficiaries. So that's one of the big things in my digital legacy, that I show people a system and a way to be able to manage passwords and to be able to hand over those things in a seamless way, so that nothing gets lost or forgotten, because we all absolutely matter. I mean, my business is called Your Final Matters for a reason, because your final matters do matter. They matter enormously, both to you and to your loved ones. So it's really, really important that when that D-Day comes, that things can progress and happen, and that baton can be handed over in the smoothest possible way. And everything that you intended to reach those people that you wanted them to reach, gets to them optimally, and we maximize the chances of that happening, really.
I can hear your passion about it, Caro. Thank you. Yeah, honestly, your passion comes across. You're wanting to help people to get things right for those final days. And like you said there, why on earth should we be leaving that money in the bank for somebody, for nobody to get it? And definitely not the people that we love and care about. So tell us a little bit more about these workshops. Where can people find you?
Well, funnily enough, on yourfinalmatters.co.uk, I also have a little Instagram and Facebook, which is at Your Final Matters. For those business owners that I help with business continuity planning, I am a grown up and I am on LinkedIn, so I have a presence there. But I do half-day workshops sort of quarterly. They are all in person at the moment, but if people are interested and they're listening further afield, I am open to doing some online if they feel that would be of benefit. And also the 2-hour workshops, those are all also viewable through my workshop site, my same website. So yeah, and I'm any emails or messages that are sent, my people talking to your people is just me talking to you. So I do read every single one of them, because it is just me. And if you are in a workplace or a workspace and you feel that employees could benefit from this sort of thing, I love teaching groups of people, because the big thing is you don't know what you don't know, and there's far more that we don't know than we do know, sadly. And getting your ducks in a row doesn't have to be difficult, because death is guaranteed, but leaving chaos is totally optional.
Oh, I love that. What a great place to leave that conversation. Death is guaranteed, but leaving chaos is totally optional. Caro, we will leave your website details in the transcript notes that go with this podcast. Thank you so much for coming today and talking about death and how we can prepare for it and having those difficult conversations. I really appreciate your time. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
If you have in any way been affected by today's podcast episode, there are numbers at the end of the transcript which you can contact. We'd like to thank you all for listening. And if you'd like to join our Facebook group, there is also a link to that in the notes that go with this podcast. Have a great day.